and welcome back to Pocket Pulp. Eric Brian Moore here, your host, ready to share another fantastic story with you this week. That's right, we do it every week. On today's episode, a very deliciously pulpy story, Pilgrim by Benjamin Wallace. Benjamin Wallace is the author of nearly 20 books, including the best-selling Duck and Cover Adventures, Junkers, the Dad Versus series, the Damien Stockwell series, and much more. He lives in Dallas, Texas, where he complains about the heat a lot. I got to work with him on his Damien Stockwell series, which you can find and buy, or buy it twice if you want, buy one for a friend, on Audible. I gotta tell you, Ben is a hell of a storyteller. He just writes these naturally quirky characters, and then he throws them into these hysterically dangerous situations. You can find his work on Amazon and on Audible, of course. Links are in the description. You can find him on Facebook under Benjamin Wallace Author and on Twitter @BooksBenjamin. And if you go to his website, BenjaminWallaceBooks.com, you can get a free audiobook. That's right, free, F-R-E-E, mofo. The book is called Commando Pandas and Other Odd Thoughts, read by the incredibly talented Phil Thrawn, who over the past year or so has become one of my favorite narrators. So I definitely recommend that you go and pick that up. And then when you're done, or during it even, go check out the Post-Apocalyptic Nomadic Warriors series, which is written by Ben and also narrated by Phil, because it's just incredible. All right, if you like what we're doing here at Pocket Pulp, please rate, review, subscribe, and then tell everybody you know, the gardener, the dog, the cat. Tell that third or second cousin of yours that you don't like because he continually chews with his mouth open. Tell that guy. And now, Pilgrim by Benjamin Wallace, read by Eric Brian Moore.
There is evil in this new world. Should it be settled and claimed in the name of God, man must go first and cleanse the forest, the rivers, and skies of the demons that haunt this new promised land. Uttered in secret beyond the chambers of the church elders, these words had become his charge. His options had been few, and facing hell-spawn on an unexplored landmass had been the most pleasant of them all. He was granted a brace of pistols, a sword, and Godspeed. Twice his ship, the Speedwell, had turned back to England for repairs, and he soon found himself aboard the Mayflower with others of his faith. They sought refuge in the new land. These other pilgrims sought freedom from persecution at the hands of the Church of England. They looked to the new land and saw God's promised land. He saw demons.
The native in the rear of the canoe was Umpagos, a Croatan tribesman, and the only ally Jonathan Parker had in the New World. A common hatred of evil and a shared language had united them in the remains of the Roanoke colony. Parker had made no allegiances during the Atlantic crossing, neither among the faithful nor the mercenary of the passengers and crew. Friendship was a burden he could not carry, so he had kept to himself, quiet and still the entirety of the voyage. The others spoke of a compact that he in good conscience could not sign. They spoke of freedom and blessings that God had provided them in the New World. The only words he had spoken were to volunteer for the first foray on the land. There he slipped away into the wicked wilderness, knowing he would never return. Though he had counted no friends among the pilgrims, he had quickly found companionship in Umpagos. Now they sat, he a white man and his bronze-skinned companion, in a canoe on a still creek. They shared few words. There was danger present. Parker's cold, hard eyes tried to pierce the mist that lifted from the surface of the water and danced lazily among the reeds. Low-hanging branches, laden with dew, obscured a view of the shoreline. Even the felt of his hat had succumbed to the dampness of the air. His brim sagged, creating shadows on the hard edges of his face. No air stirred. The mist hung there at the height of a man, no higher or lower, casting the watery passage in a shroud of ethereal languor. But there was more than the otherworldly mist that hung in the air. Parker and Umphagos both felt it. The presence of evil tried to hide behind their senses. It made no sound and drew no eye, but to the companions in the canoe it was more present than the trees. Umphagos pointed to the far bank. Parker's eyes followed and made note of what had drawn the brave's attention. Wisps of mist rushed to fill a void that had been left in the atmosphere. A splash, deep like a large rock thrown close to the water, pulled his attention to the near bank. Parker again turned to his trusted friend. Umphagos continued to paddle calmly. There was no break in his rhythm as he answered Parker's raised eyebrow. Alum Bagwinosis. Parker knew there were demons in this land, but he relied on Umphagos to identify them. Umphagos had been raised in the church established by Virginia Dare, but his familiarity with the tribes and their legends had given Parker tremendous insight into the demons he sought. Alum Bagwinosis. Little men tip over canoes. His English was guttural. Raised among the survivors of Roanoke, Umphagos had spoken English since birth, but the Croatan majority of the amalgamated tribe was heard in his speech. Another spelunk came from another bank. Are they demons? Umphagos shook his head in response, laid his paddle in the canoe, and drew a knife from his belt. They are dangerous. Jonathan Parker withdrew his paddle from the water and placed his hands in his lap. He slowly brushed back the fold of his ink-black cloak. The hollow sound of water swallowing mass came again and again. No less than a dozen times did these deep splashes sound from the banks of the creek. The still waters rippled as the coils of water reached the canoe. The dugout rocked gently. It was not from the movement of the men inside. The ripples faded. The water was still once again. Too were the birds and creatures that shuffled through the underbrush that gave the forest its breath. All was still. The dugout lurched. Parker in the bow was pulled to the right. Umphagos astern was shoved to the left. The directions reversed violently as the bow began to rise. Parker grabbed the edge of the canoe with a single hand as it continued its erratic motions. The stern bounced. The bow dipped. The distances became greater with each shove. Parker peered into the water. Their forms were barely visible. Their garb matched the color of the riverbed and seemed to flow like reeds in the water. A half-dozen squat men stood beneath the shadow of the bow, their arms outstretched with their hands on the wooden shell of the craft. The thrusts of the Alum Bagwinosis became even more violent. They began to twist the canoe on its axis, threatening to roll the pair into the now bubbling water. Should they fall beneath the surface, there was no telling what these mystic creatures would do to them. Parker knew they had to reach the shore. He drove his paddle like a spear into the water. The blade cut the froth and struck a pair of hands from the craft. Blood poured into the creek as a shriek burst from the water. The creature retreated from the boat. He drove the blade of the paddle back into the water, but his intended target was quicker than the last. The small man grabbed the shaft of the paddle and drew down. Parker's weight followed. Had the other Alum Bagwinosis not been driving the canoe up from the surface at that moment, he would have been pulled into the water. He released the paddle and fell back into the canoe. The wounded creature burst from the water. The creature was no taller than a child, but it was twice a child's width. Its leap peaked at a tremendous height. Blood and water fell from the creature as it seemingly hung in the air, before diving towards the man clad in black. It struck Parker with a shocking weight. How could anything so small weigh so much? This density no doubt kept the Ato-sis glued to riverbeds as they set upon their nefarious deeds, but this creature landed like a sack of grain upon his chest. The wind was driven from him, and he struggled to regain his breath. The Ato-sis pinned him to the floor of the canoe. A foul combination of creek water and saliva dripped like hate from the snarling creature's mouth. Parker drew a revitalizing breath and grabbed the beast by the wrists. He began to sit up, forcing the short-stature attacker to his feet. The creature snarled and snapped. Its teeth, dingy and rotted, met in fierce strikes as it drove forward. The weight of the creature doubled. Parker was forced back into the canoe. His head was thrown back with such force that his hat fell from his crown. From this unfortunate vantage he caught sight of Umpagos. His native companion was beset by two of the water devils. The brave slashed wildly with his knife as they tore at his neck and shoulders, trying to draw him into the water. Streaks of crimson were left where nails had drawn against the Indian's bronze skin. Umpagos fought viciously. Parker looked back to his own assailant. The creature had grown in height and dimension. Standing, the Ato-sis would now tower over the Englishman. Parker threw his forearm across the neck of the snarling beast, whose teeth had grown to gleaming, sharp points. He braced his shoulder against the bottom of the boat and held the fangs at bay. He called back to the native. "You said they were little men." "They get bigger," Umpagos called through gritted teeth. There was a screeching as the brave's blade finally struck a blow. The creature released its hold and slid back into the water. The canoe shot from the creek. The hand-hewn log leapt several feet from the water as the Ato-sis that remained beneath the surface pressed their attack. At the peak of the canoe's flight, Parker shoved the creature from him. They dropped. The canoe splashed into the water. As he crashed, Parker reached to his belt and drew a gilded snaphaunce. The pistol roared with flame and smoke as it fired blessed lead up into the still-growing mass of the fallen creature. The force tore at the creature's side and threw his landing off-center onto the edge of the canoe. There was a gasp of pain, and the giant rolled overboard. Cordite and smoke filled the canoe and spilled over to the surface of the water. The shaking stopped. The canoe rocked gently on calming waters. Parker sat upright, bewildered. He turned to the stern. Umpagos was free of his attackers. They too had retreated at the sound of the firearm. The native looked stunned for only a moment. He cast his confusion aside and grabbed the remaining paddle. His arms rippled with muscle as he furiously dug the blade into the water and made for shore. Parker hurried to reload as the brave's powerful strokes drove them to the relative safety of land. He looked over his shoulder. The Ato-sis had emerged on the far side of the creek. Their movements were barely visible through the mist. Confusion had replaced rage, and they paced the banks, stepping toward the water before quickly stepping back. They must have sensed the haste in the native's stroke, for the hatred soon reappeared. Shrieking with the voice of the devil, they dove back into the water. The canoe drove nose first into the muddy bank. Parker leapt to land, a pistol in each hand. Umpagos scrambled from the rear of the canoe. The still creek turned to a rushing wave as the creatures charged beneath the surface. Their mass drove the water before them. Umpagos stood beside the Englishman with a tomahawk in each hand. They said nothing, but stood with hardened eyes turned toward the onslaught that approached them from beneath the creek. The wave had moved deceptively, building quickly, but as it neared, the pair on the shore realized its true size. The water curled as it rose above the shoreline. It broke at the bank and washed up to their feet. "Dear God," uttered Parker, as he realized the force it would take to generate such a wave. "Dear white man's God," uttered Umpagos. The horde of Ato-sis erupted into the air, as if they had been spit from the water. A dozen little men burst from the creek and grew as they soared through the mist. Like Parker's attacker, their appearance turned more gruesome as they gained mass and stature. The beasts soared through the air to great heights. They landed in front of the pair and behind them. Each creature transmitted such an impact through the muddy shore that Parker felt their landings in the toes of his boots. The Alombagwinosis now stood over 8 feet tall, rippled with muscle, and had Umpagos and Parker surrounded. Smoke, fire, and lead breathed from Parker's pistols. The reports were deafening and echoed within the hollow on the shore, but the creatures no longer feared the boom of the white man's weapon. Their resolve was strong. Their snarling increased even as 2 of their kind fell in a spray of crimson and flesh to the blessed bullets from Parker's barrels. With a deftness that only years of experience could bring, Parker slid the brace of pistols into his belt and drew his rapier. Umpagos stood beside him with a tomahawk clutched confidently in each hand. He knew their weight and balance intimately and rocked them in his grip. The Alombagwinosis did not circle. With 8 roars of horror, they charged the men that had already felled 3 of their brethren. Little light filtered through the tight cluster of trees. What broke through the heavy summer foliage caught Parker's blade as it set upon its vicious purpose. If these beasts would move without pause, he would teach them to respect his presence. In the old world, his reputation would give men second thoughts, but here these savage creatures and demons knew not the perils of throwing in against him and his sword. The blade danced among the Alombagwinosis as he fought with an inspired rhythm. His opponents unknowingly fell into step with the furious beat of the blade. Every battle was a song. Only the victor knew the song. Umpagos delivered fatal blows in time with the beat of the Pilgrim warrior. The heads of his hatchets sounded the beat of the fight. The feathers on his tomahawks turned from colorful plumes to the monochrome of death as he struck each opponent no less than 3 times. Their initial charge countered, the creatures pulled back. Fewer stood now than before, and their bestial eyes turned to their fallen. Parker and Umpagos watched as the bodies of their attackers spasmed and retched. The twitch of death consumed them in a violent manner. He had killed many men and seen their limbs continue to move after a fatal blow, but for the giant creatures it was much more pronounced. Their dead arms beat ruts into the mud. Their legs flailed, driving the corpses in meandering paths across the surface of the earth. As death consumed them fully, they reverted to their original forms. The remaining creatures stared through murder at the strange white man and his companion. Snarls became guttural exchanges as they seemed to communicate for the first time. He had taught them to pause. "They speak, Umpagos." "Yes." "Do you know what they say?" "No. This language I do not know. Maybe they say, 'Run away.'" The giants roared again. "No, I think I was wrong." Umpagos raised his tomahawks, but the Alombagwinosis did not rush with abandon against the men. 2 split from the group and moved towards the trees. Their mighty forms reached to the branches and tore clubs from the trunks. The trees protested with creaks and splinters as the massive branches were rent. The other creatures charged. Long strides carried them quickly. Parker raised his blade and thrust. His faithful steel pierced only air as the Alombagwinosis shrunk to its former size and slid beneath the white warrior's legs. The tiny creature seized Parker's ankles as it slid through and pulled the man in black's legs out from under him. The mud absorbed his fall, but Parker found himself face down on the ground. He heard a grunt of exertion from his left and quickly rolled towards it. The tree limb crashed where he had landed. Only by shortening his distance to the ogreish creature had he been spared a death at the hands of timber. His ankles were still in the hands of the child-sized creature. He kicked and felt the grip strengthen and grow. The hands that had been about his ankle now gripped from calf to heel. A glance to his feet revealed that the monster had grown again and now held his legs fast. The creature leapt to his feet, and hurled Parker into the woods. His limbs flailed as he soared. Small branches broke as his weight met them. The throw had been so mighty that he wondered if he would ever lit on the earth again. Then he struck a tree. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and the steel from his hand. He collapsed at the base of the trunk as he saw the underbrush give way to the giants. Umpagos had seen the giant shrink and pull the Pilgrim to the ground. As his own attacker rushed in, Umpagos stepped to the side. The giant shrank and slid harmlessly through the mud. Then Umpagos was struck by a tree. The crude club caught him in the chest and lifted him from his feet. The brave soared into the air and landed in the water far from the safety of the shore. 2 Alumbaguinosis cackled as they dove in after him. The water was their world. Parker rose unsteadily to his feet and felt the emptiness in his hand. He looked around for his rapier. It was not within reach. A fist the size of a head approached him. He fell to the ground as the punch shattered bark and pulp from the tree behind him. He scrambled forward to his feet, digging into his tunic as the second creature arrived on the scene. It reached for him. Parker drew a kukri from his belt and slashed at the monster's fingers. The Alumbaguinosis drew back, his hand in pain. The 2 giants stood shoulder to shoulder and stared down at the man in black robes before them. Together, they attacked. They came at him furiously. Parker slashed in kind with the curved blade of the Gurkha's knife. He cut at the air where a moment before was a chest or neck. The creatures added their ability to change in mass and stature to slipping the blade's edge. They grew and shrank quickly, and each of their forms caused Parker pain. They clawed while small and struck with heavy hands while large. A flurry of strikes came from all sides and levels, their demonic ability turning their force of 2 into the attacks of a larger group. A blow intended for his head struck his leg as the creature shifted his form to child height. A punch aimed at his groin became a powerful strike to his face, always present with a mouths full of daggers. Soon, Parker was driven by force of fist, foot, and fang back to the bank of the river. He burst from the brush and saw no sign of Umpagos or the other Alumbaguinosis in the small clearing. The attacks continued as the creatures drove him back to the water's edge. He knew that he could not survive fighting the beasts in their own domain. To be forced into the water would mean certain death. He had to take the offensive now. The attacker's heights changed so rapidly that landing a blow to the head or chest was impossible. So he dropped to the ground. Parker fell to one knee, driving the blade of the kukri through the foot of an Alumbaguinosis. The creature screamed in pain, and Parker rose, pulling the blade free from the foot and upward through the creature's torso. It fell and shrank, reverting to its prime form of the mischievous canoe tipper. His final attacker withdrew, staring in horror at his fallen companions. It realized that it now stood alone against this white man. It snarled, but did not engage Parker and his odd-shaped weapon. There was a scream behind him from the water's edge. Parker turned and saw a horrified Alumbaguinosis scramble from the water onto shore. Fear filled its eyes as it grabbed deep into the mud to pull itself from the creek. A bronze hand burst from the water, snatched its ankle, and dragged the creature back in. A few moments later, Umpagos rose from the water and stood next to the man in black. The final Alumbaguinosis screamed, but backed away from the pair. Umpagos raised his tomahawk. The beast shrunk from its giant form and dashed into the woods. Umpagos stepped to pursue, but Parker put a hand on his native companion. The Indian protested. "It will warn others that we approach." Parker shook his head. "It will warn others that we bring death." The two surveyed the area. The twitching had stopped. The creatures had all returned to their smaller selves. Umpagos waved to the bodies.
It is said that he who sees Ato-sis will find death beneath the water. You and I will now drown.
Right now?
Not right now, but now our fates are tied to the bottom of a river, lake, or ocean.
Parker retrieved his sword and placed it back in the scabbard. His robe closed across him, enshrouding all but his face in folds of black. Perhaps for you, Umpagos, my fate has been foretold 1,000 times. I have been told I will fall, be crushed, burn. I do not believe in any fate but that which comes from God, and only He knows what my future holds. The Pilgrim warrior strode back to the canoe. Come, Umpagos, we have no need to fear the water. They paddled in silence. The occasional splash drew Umpagos' attention, but if it was the Ato-sis, they made no more efforts to upset the canoe. Parker smiled grimly. A reputation was a powerful weapon among men and the more intelligent beasts of the world. He and Umpagos had now established theirs in the New World, and it was a powerful one. A pale man, not of this land, who breathes fire and death, and a native who kills the Ato-sis in the safety of their watery homes. He didn't know how long the journey before them was, but as he did the work of the church to clear the land of demons, he knew that all but the hardiest of opponents would now hesitate before attacking the Pilgrim warrior and his companion. Umpagos said nothing. This was his way, but the silence sounded different. It now seemed burdensome. Perhaps he was picturing his watery grave, the fate foretold by the Ato-sis. Parker did not believe this superstition. Giving any credence to the ridiculous belief would cause conflict anyway. His fate had been foretold by supposed wizards, alleged sorcerers, self-proclaimed seers, and gypsies. Each claimed to possess a divine eye to the future, but each prediction was in conflict with another. Impalement, conflagration, defenestration, falling from a great height. That fate would be able to provide the situation to fulfill his foretold demise simply told him that no one but the Lord could predict the future. But Umpagos, his fate only predicted this once, may take the news with more speculation and concern. Parker felt the need to reassure his native friend that spotting a water-born midget could in no way shape one's destiny, but he did not know the Algonquin word for midget. His skill for language was second only to his ability with a blade. Across the continents he had mastered dialects in a matter of days. The more languages he learned, the easier it was to adapt another. Once immersed in a culture, he could quickly become fluent. However, Algonquin shared no root with any other part of the world. Besides, even a familiarity with a language could not guarantee that the term would have presented itself before now. He was about to ask when the brave spoke. "Stop." Parker turned to his companion. The native had ceased his stroke and set his paddle across his lap. "What is it, Umpagos?" The native did not answer him. Instead, he spoke loudly towards the shoreline. His voice was calm and bold as he addressed the woods around them in his native tongue. Parker searched the empty banks of the creek as he translated Umpagos' words. "We come in peace from Croatan Island. We ask for travel through the lands of our Abenaki brothers." There was no response. Parker did not doubt that Umpagos spoke to empty trees. He himself had faced warriors of concealment over the years. The knife he wielded was from the feared Gurkhas of Nepal. These mountain fighters moved like mist and crept unseen like vines in the defense of their home. Even their ghost-like movements did not compare to what he had seen in this new world. He believed that it was a simple belief that made the men of the New World such formidable hunters. These warriors did not seek to hide amid the environment. They did not attempt to blend with nature. They believed they were part of it. Their beliefs, their lifestyle, nothing was in conflict with their world. They were not hiding. They simply were. Umpagos spoke again. "We seek Ato-sis." They emerged. Along the banks 36 warriors stepped forward. Each was armed and bore a scowl. One of the braves spoke and waved the canoe over. Umpagos resumed paddling and directed the craft ashore. Parker stepped from the canoe. Several braves approached him. "Do these men mean to harm us, Umpagos?" "No." The Abenaki seized Parker by the arms and pulled the weapons from his belt. "They may mean you harm." Parker began to struggle. "Do not fight, my friend. All will be well." Umpagos handed the warriors his own tomahawks. Parker ceased his resistance. The Abenaki warriors growled as they took his blades and pistols. One brave spit at his feet. "Why do they treat me this way?" A large warrior, taller than Parker, stepped from the woods and screamed a string of what could only have been obscenities at the Pilgrim warrior. Parker did not know the words, but with the rate at which he referred to Parker's mother and different animals, he could only assume that they were obscenities. In each hand, the warrior held one half of a broken spit. The ends were sharpened and hardened by fire. Totems were painted along its length. "You are not the first English they've met," Umpagos winced. The warrior raised one of the clubs and struck Parker across the temple. The impact brought a painful sleep. Parker awoke encircled by natives. Taunts, slurs, and rocks were thrown at him as he tried to take in his surroundings. He was clearly no longer on the banks of the creek. Sunlight poured freely down upon him, unfiltered by leaves and tree limbs. Since being knocked unconscious, they had dragged him into a clearing in the tribe's village. Beyond the throngs of Indians that surrounded him rose the peaks of wigwams. His wrists were bound with a leather strap, and he struggled to get to his feet. Once upright, he stood firm and made no attempt to shield himself from the stones and sticks hurled his way. The calm and stoic posture soon affected the crowd. They threw less, screamed less, and the furor that drove them diminished. Parker scanned the crowd in search of the chief, but saw no one he could presume to be the leader of the tribe. He spoke, his Algonquin nearly perfect. "Is this how you treat strangers? With bindings and stoning?" They cowed. "Where is your chief?" There was no reaction. Their faces were like stone, expressionless and a little craggy. "What have you done with Umpagos?" Again, there was no reaction. He studied them. The men looked fierce. The women looked no less courageous, but they were prettier. He mused that even a world away, separated by ocean, language, and culture, he found them attractive. There was a parting of the crowd, and Umpagos was shoved into the circle with Parker. His hands were not bound, and he set to work freeing the man in black. Parker spoke to his companion in English. "What is happening, Umpagos? Why have they greeted us this way, and why aren't you bound?" "They do not hate me. Only you. This Abenaki tribe has met an Englishman before, and they do not trust you." "An Englishman? Who?" "A man they call Thomas Hunt. He came here and stole children from these people." "That's horrible." Umpagos looked puzzled. Parker explained the word. "Bad. Very bad." Umpagos nodded. "Yes, they think so too." "Did you tell them that I mean no harm?" "Yes, I told them we are looking for Ato-sis." "What did they say?" "They said nothing. They laughed like this." Umpagos leaned his head back and laughed heartily. His laugh was deep and contagious. The crowd soon joined him. "But they are letting us go?" "No. Yes. How do you say both no and yes at the same time?" "Maybe." Yes, maybe. I told them you are a great warrior and that you seek to cleanse the land of monsters and evil spirits. And they laughed again, louder than the first time. Umpagos finished untying his friend. So why untie me? They say if you are such a great warrior, then you can defeat their greatest warrior. Parker rubbed his wrists from where the binding had slowed the circulation. He scanned the crowd. He towered above them all, even without his hat. Physical dominance would not be a problem. His reach was certainly greater than any in the crowd. His confidence rose. Then it dawned on him. Wait, it's... Yes, the one who hit you and made you not awake. With this revelation, the crowd parted again. The native that moved toward him stood an entire head above anyone in the crowd. His broad shoulders moved those who had not stepped aside with ease. In each hand, he held the clubs that had struck Parker into unconsciousness. The giant brave moved into the clearing. The massive Abenaki wore leggings of deerskin, but no clothing on his upper body. Parker saw his muscles ripple beneath the bronze skin, and noted the scars across the native's chest. 3 parallel marks ran jagged from shoulder to abdomen, the wounds of a bear. Below the claw marks was a discolored circle no less than 4 inches across. The crowd roared, and the massive Indian raised the clubs above his head. His roar set off a wave of abdominals, and he turned to face the crowd. This is when Parker saw it. A second circular scar marred the man's back, and the diameter of the wound was roughly the girth of the clubs he held in his hands. Ato-sis, he gasped. Umpagos looked puzzled. Those clubs... You told me Ato-sis has his prey choose the spit upon which they are to be roasted. Those clubs are the spit. Ato-sis must have run him through, but he somehow managed to escape. The massive native finished his turn and growled at the Englishman. I do not wish to fight you, Parker declared in Algonquin. You will fight, little man. The warrior crossed the clubs before him and raised them above his head. The crowd responded with wild cheers. Parker raised his voice and spoke to the crowd. We seek Ato-sis. We wish to destroy the creature that hunts you like game. The giant grunted. I have seen Ato-sis, and I alone have lived. I could not stop him. Please, if you cannot stop me who could not stop him, then you could not stop him yourself. Parker hung his head. Your language is bad, but your reason is sound. Come, if you must. He turned to Umpagos. If I should fall in this fight, you know what to do. Umpagos nodded. I shall take news of your death to Croton and Miss Dare. No, idiot. If I fall, get in here and help me. Umpagos backed into the crowd, and the giant charged. Like the horns of a bull, the 2 pieces of the spit pointed at Parker as the beast of a man charged. Earth turned to dust beneath the moccasins. The ground shook as the man neared. Parker had no weapons. There was nothing left in his belt that he could use to block the sharpened clubs. Only his hat and his cloak were left to him, and he would have to make do with what he had. He slipped his hands to the hasp of his cloak and pulled it from his shoulders. He draped the cloth like a matador's muleta, but this man was no bull. He charged the man, not the cloth. Parker stepped aside at the last moment and entwined the brute's left arm in the robe. Jonathan rolled on the ground twice to tighten the cape's grip on the native's arm. He leapt back to his feet as the Titan swung his right hand. Parker ducked, and the half a spit cut through the air and passed over his head. Fortune had allowed the blow to knock the hat from his head instead of his head from his shoulders. The native pulled with his left arm and yanked Parker back to his feet. Parker dodged again as the spit became a lethal extension of the warrior's backhand. He struggled to maintain a grip on the cloak. The warrior pulled at the cloak and reeled Parker closer in. He swung again, and Parker dropped to the ground. The massive native stabbed at the fallen Englishman with the spit. Parker rolled right. The spit was driven into the ground no less than the length of a man's forearm. Parker kicked viciously at the warrior's face and drove him back from the embedded weapon. Blood gushed from the brute's nose. He reached for his face with his empty hand and backed away from the Englishman. Parker was dragged across the dirt of the makeshift arena. Hauled near the embedded spit, Parker seized the opportunity to wrap the cloak around the stake. He cinched off the garment as the tribe's greatest warrior reached the length of the cloak. The brute's retreat was halted, and he looked through teary eyes to see why his movement was restricted. Parker leapt in close. If he could keep the man far enough away from the stake to keep the cloak taut, he might have a chance. He landed a flurry of punches. He tried to focus on the nose, driving pain through the face of the massive brave. The native growled louder as frustration built. He struggled to block the blows with his right hand as he could not free his left from the anchor that he himself had driven into the ground. Parker struck hard and often, but could not break the constitution of the huge man. The brave had had enough and dropped his guard. Absorbing punches, he defied the beating and reached for the club in his entangled left hand. Parker didn't duck in time. The spit caught him across the shoulder. Only being so close to the brute had saved him from the full force of the club. Still, the blow sent him sprawling across the earthen circle that served as the arena. He was able to tuck into a fall and convert the momentum into an uncontrolled roll across the ground. He came to rest next to his hat. The brute used the pause in the action to free his hand from the robe. Parker sighed. Outside of angering the towering native, his punches were having little effect. He needed something more forceful. He grasped his hat by the brim and tore the hat band from the black felt. Quickly, he wrapped the leather strap around his right hand and made a fist with the metal buckle resting across his knuckles. He sprung to his feet and charged the giant Abenaki. The monster raised the club to strike. Parker dove inside the blow and put his full strength behind his right hand. The buckle connected. Teeth exploded from the native's mouth as his head snapped left. The giant stumbled back and lifted the spit above his head. He smiled through a bloody mass of gums and shattered enamel, then collapsed across Parker's cloak. The crowd said nothing. Their greatest warrior had fallen to an outsider. The Abenaki melted away, revealing the chief. The old Indian had been amid the crowd, waiting for the outcome of the fight. He waved the Englishman over silently. Parker pulled the buckle from his fist and placed it in a pouch at his waist. He retrieved his hat and looked to Umpagos. "Get my cloak." Umpagos nodded. Parker stepped forward to speak with the chief as Umpagos struggled to pull the cloak from under the mountainous and unconscious Abenaki warrior.
"You fight well, English."
"Chief, I have no interest in harming your people. I only seek the demon Ato-sis to rid the world of his evil."
"You speak of evil, yet your people come here and still are children."
"I've heard of your encounter with my people. My apologies will not bring your children back, but I offer them nonetheless. Please know that not all of my people are evil." The chief did not move, but held the Englishman's stare. It must have been in that gaze that he found trust, for he turned his back to the Pilgrim warrior and bid him to follow. Parker called to his companion. "Come, Umpagos." The chief led the pair through the camp. Parker watched the villagers as they watched him. To them, he must be a mystery. If what Umpagos said was true, they had seen white men before, but Parker was unique even among Europeans. At his height, he would stand above a crowd of his fellow Englishmen. The villagers appeared wary and held their children closer when he passed. He could not blame them. The horror of having a child stolen was something that he could not imagine, and those that stole in the name of the Queen were the greatest types of cowards. They stepped through the entrance of a wigwam, and the chief invited them to sit down. His tone turned from wary to calm.
"You seek Ato-sis?"
"Yes."
"What do you know of him?"
Parker struggled to find the Algonquin word for demon. There was no equivalent. "He is an evil spirit that takes the form of a lizard. He tortures his victims, forces them to select their own spit that they may roast alive. He dines on the flesh of men," he added in English, "a demon most foul."
"Ato-sis is not what you call him. I do not know the word you use. He is an evil animal, yes, but he is of this world. He looks like a man, but is not a man. Scales cover his body where there should be skin."
The chief took a sad breath.
"What you say of his wickedness is true. Ahiga has seen it."
"Ahiga is the man I fought." The chief nodded. "I noticed his scars, his weapon. He fought me with the spit of the demon." The chief nodded again.
"Ato-sis caught him hunting by the shores of the lake. Ahiga was forced to choose a spit. His keen eye spotted weakness in one. This is the one he chose. The spit was shoved through his body, and he was placed upon the fire. The spit broke. He fell into the coals, but was able to throw fire at Ato-sis until he could escape. I am happy he came back to us."
Parker nodded. There was more than a touch of pride in the chief's voice. The man he had just beaten with a hat buckle was his own son. "Ahiga sounds like a brave warrior."
"Yes, my son is a brave warrior, and if he could not defeat Ato-sis, no one can."
"Return to me my weapons, and tell me where Ato-sis dwells. You need not concern yourself with my success or failure."
"Though Glooskab has made the monsters of old smaller, they are still dangerous. Even with your white man weapons, you have little chance. His scales are too thick. But it is your choice. Ahiga will guide you to Ato-sis once he awakens. Until then, you should rest."
With this, the chief stood and departed. Parker turned to Umpagos. "Who is this Glooskab?"
"Glooskab created the good world. He created the rules that govern hunting. He made the old spirits smaller and safer so that man could live on the lands. He is like your god."
Parker was silent for a moment, then spoke. "Umpagos, I welcome your counsel, and it's true that hidden in your fairy tales of animal spirits there are clues I will need to follow. But remember this, you shall never equate your myths and legends to the one true God again. As far as I'm concerned, your Glooskab is as much a tool of the devil as Ato-sis. You were taught to know better. What would Miss Dare say of your blasphemy?" Umpagos's head sunk. "Now, we should rest. When we awake, Ato-sis awaits the steel of this Christian." Parker lay back and pulled the wide brim of his hat over his eyes. Aside from the bloodied mouth, Ahiga bore few bruises from the fight. He continued to watch Parker with disdain, but directed little hatred towards Umpagos. He communicated only with the Croatan as he led the pair through the forest. Parker marveled at the silence. Despite his massive size, Ahiga made no sound as he led them to the lair of Ato-sis. In fact, Parker was the only one that produced sound from his footsteps. Often he looked behind him to see that Umphagos was still there. He did not regret correcting the brave for his blasphemy, but it did occur to him later that the brave had not been raised in a proper church. The Croatan had accepted the survivors of Roanoke with open arms, but it was apparent that after 40 years with the tribe, even the most faithful Christians among them had begun to lose faith. Their understanding had been mixed with the lies of the devil through a native's understanding of the world. They described the demons as monsters, as if the creature, even the one that had attacked the colony, were of this world and not the spawn of Satan himself. His ignorance was not his fault. It was a miracle that there were people in this new world that called themselves Christians. Ahiga crouched suddenly. Parker dropped behind him. The mighty warrior did not move. He stared deeply into the woods before him. Parker noticed the circular scar on his back. What pain to be impaled upon a spit. It was no wonder the church had sent him here. Even stories of such a horrific demon would slow colonization of the New World. Ato-sis was hardly the worst thing this continent had to offer God-fearing men and women. There were stories of creatures much worse. Without the influence of the church, the demons of this world had run abated for millennia. For centuries, the church had tried to hide this new world from the old. Their fears were not unwarranted. Upon its discovery, man first met with the devil's spawn. It was for this reason that maps had been hidden, charts redrawn, and men of genius cast as heretics in public forums. But with the latest discovery, there was no stemming the tide of men that came for conquest and profit. Now pioneers came, and they must be protected. This was his charge, not to kill demons, but to safeguard the lives and souls of countless colonists. Ahiga stood and turned. Whatever had alerted the warrior was now of no concern to him. For the first time since leaving the Abenaki camp, he spoke to Parker.
"It is nothing, but we are close to Ato-sis. This is what you want."
"Yes."
"He is clever. I am not easily caught off guard, yet he surprised me from the water as I drank."
"Having faced you myself, Ahiga, I will not underestimate Ato-sis. If he can subdue you, then I am certain we are in for a fight."
"You fight well, Englishman, but Ato-sis is strong, stronger than me. It is only by the grace of the spirits that I escaped."
"I have God on my side. He is much stronger than your spirits."
"I know not of this God. But if he is stronger than the great spirits, then we shall side with him and hope for victory."
The trio resumed their march. Ahiga used the two halves of the spit to move branches from his path. He said little else on their journey. Shadows grew longer, and the air grew cooler as the sun began to set. For much of their march, there was only darkness beyond their vision. There was nothing until the warm glow of a fire illuminated a clearing by the edge of a great lake. Ahiga stopped and looked at the two men. He nodded and broke off to the right of the group. Umphagos put his hand on Parker's shoulder. Parker pointed to his left. The brave acknowledged the plan and moved silently into the woods. Parker knelt. His prayer was for courage and quick victory. He stood and stepped into the clearing. But for the flicker of fire, there was no movement. The campsite was Spartan. The remains of a kill were laid across a rock. Several spits were stuck in the ground, each carved with the devilish markings like the ones that ran the length of Ahiga's weapons. Parker could not see his allies in the woods, but knew they were there ready to assist him, one out of duty, the other out of vengeance. "Ato-sis!" Parker's voice boomed in the clearing. There was no response, no movement. "Ato-sis! It is time that you answered for your crimes against God. Show yourself!" There was no sound except for the lapping of the lake against the shoreline of the clearing. "You cannot hide from God, demon!" "You're a funny-looking man." The voice was smooth and rich. Parker turned. The creature was monstrous, larger than a higa. It dwarfed the Englishman. "What is that on your head?" The voice did not match the creature's vile appearance. The face that spoke could be confused for human only in the dimmest of lights. A wide mouth with thin lips betrayed its demonic nature. The nose lay flat against its face, with the nostrils placed aside of the head. Its yellow eyes were the color of sickness and reflected each ember of the firelight. Parker did not answer the creature's questions. "And you walk around in much more cloth than the others." The beast was as broad at the shoulders as a man was tall, and was covered with what looked like scabs of a leper. It moved further into the firelight, and Parker saw that they were not scabs, but scales, patches of hardened skin layered over one another that bristled when the beast walked. It was not unlike a serpent moving like a man. Ato-sis swayed from side to side as he circled, jutting his torso forward before any forward movement. He leaned impossibly forward and used a great tail for balance. "Ato-sis, I come in the name of God to end your demonic actions against man." "And your speech is odd, though most men I meet don't talk much at all." The creature smiled, exposing rows of pointed teeth caked in yellow stains. "They mostly just scream and beg." "You will get no such satisfaction from me." Parker pulled back his cloak to reveal the brace of pistols and his rapier. "Shiny." Giant strides took Ato-sis across the clearing to the row of spits. He indicated the kill on the rock with a massive taloned hand. "As you can see, I have just eaten. But it is no matter. Men take a while to cook." He held a massive arm out to the sharpened sticks. "Choose." "What makes a man choose, demon?" "I choose to fight and rid the world of your evil." The creature chuckled and spoke in English. "You are indeed an odd creature, Jonathan Parker." The man in black was aghast. That this creature could know his name and in his own language was proof of the devil's work. "You look surprised, Parker. You, a man of the cloth. I know of your quest, your pilgrimage. You hunt demons? Or do you hunt for salvation? Do you run from demons of your own?" Ato-sis smiled. "Why would a man choose his own death on my stake, you ask? It's simple, really. I do not take life, Jonathan Parker. I offer much more. I do not consume just the flesh of man. I consume their sins. I offer salvation." Parker's shock was replaced with anger. "Blasphemy!" The creature's smooth voice did not quaver. "Upon my fire, man is cleansed. His sins are burned away.
they are cast off and float away like the embers of a fire.
You speak with the tongue of the devil, Ato-sis. The creature's smile broadened as it pulled a spit from the ground.
Do I? For what other reason would a man choose the pain of fire? I offer the peace of clear conscience.
You hunt men. Again the creature laughed.
Hardly. I don't hunt men. Men seek me, just as you have, though I must admit you have come farther than any other. You are a most sinful creature, Jonathan Parker. You seek atonement. I can offer it to you. I can free you from the burden you carry.
Parker was silent. His rage was building. He knew anger was a distraction in battle, so he breathed deep to drive it away. There is no salvation but through Christ, demon. What you offer is deceit and lies.
Believe what you want, Parker. It will not change the outcome of our encounter.
Ato-sis moved fast in the shadows. He hurled the spit at the Christian warrior and pulled another from the ground. Parker dodged the missile as the wooden stake whistled past his head and embedded itself in a tree behind him. He drew a pistol and fired. His aim was true. The blessed lead ball struck Ato-sis in the chest and flattened itself against the scales of his leathery skin. The impact did little but startle the creature. It held the spit in front of him like a broadsword.
You see, Christian, you fight with fire, and still I stand. I am immortal.
Parker drew with his left hand and fired a second bullet blessed by the elders of the church. Its aim was true and hit the creature above the eye. Ato-sis screamed in pain as his head whipped back. He reached for the wound briefly and pulled his hand away. Blood ran from the wound into his eye. The creature looked to the blood on his hand and was startled. Had he never seen his own blood? "You bleed, demon!" Ato-sis screamed as fury and rage overcame him. He rushed for the Pilgrim warrior, the spit held forth like a lance. Parker drew his sword. He was no match for the demon's strength. Agility was his only advantage. Parker sidestepped the point of the spit and struck the monster in the back as it passed. The thick, leathery skin shook the blow with little effect. The creature turned to face the Pilgrim warrior with a smile on his face.
"You are a quick one, Christian, but you cannot win. I am too strong."
The beast lunged. Parker rushed forward and got inside the blow. The spit shattered as it struck the ground. Parker thrust, but his blade found only air as the creature's tail swept him from his feet. He rolled back and gained his footing as Ato-sis rushed him. Talons and teeth glinted in the firelight. His blade was a flash of silver as it parried the blows. Sparks flew from the weapon's edge as sharpened claws slid down its length. Whether they dulled his blade or honed its edge, he could not tell, but the hasp shook in his hand as though he was drawing it across a whetstone. The flurry of blade and claw continued, with neither man nor beast giving ground. Ato-sis grew tired of the standoff and withdrew. For the first time, his voice showed anger.
"Choose your spits, Christian. Your courage is admirable, but it delays the inevitable. I will see you roast on my fire. I will consume you and your soul."
"My soul is spoken for, demon!" Ato-sis shrieked. Parker braced for another charge, but the demon did not attack. His arm grasped at his back, and he spun, trying to gain another inch to his reach. The beast put his back to Parker, and the Englishman saw the source of aggravation. Umpagos's tomahawk hung from the demon's back. The Croatan stepped from the woods, the matching weapon in his hand. Ato-sis snarled and lunged at the Indian that had struck him from behind. His voice became a hiss of Algonquin.
"Only a coward strikes from the rear, Umpagos."
The native was not unnerved. "You would not turn around." Ato-sis reached the tomahawk embedded in his shoulder blade and pulled it from the wound. Blood gushed from the cut, but the demon did not seem bothered.
"You too shall perish this night, Umpagos."
"This creature speaks my name, Pilgrim." Jonathan Parker pulled the cloak from his shoulders and let it drop to the ground. "Yes, he is a true demon, Umpagos." "Did you tell him about me?" "No, my friend. He has powers of perception granted by the devil himself." "What did you tell him?" "Not now, Umpagos. We must dispatch this demon." Ato-sis laughed, his calm nature returning.
"Two puny men. You cannot harm me."
"That wound upon your shoulder says otherwise." Ato-sis smiled and stepped into the firelight. There he drew Umpagos' tomahawk across his own chest. The scales bristled as they broke under the blade's edge. Blood poured from the cut, but only for a moment. The scales quickly reformed over the gash. The blood stopped. Ato-sis laughed an evil laugh as he crushed the head of the tomahawk in his hand.
"There is nothing you can do but burn."
They had known each other for only a short time, but Parker and Umpagos were warriors. Hardened by many battles, they both sensed the moment of opportunity and attacked in unison. Each man rushed from a separate flank. The wide eyes of the lizard saw each approach. Talons and tail flew in a series of counters as the two companions struck repeated blows against the hardened scales. They fell like flint from the stone, but left no opening of flesh for the duo to exploit. A long sweep of the creature's tail knocked Umpagos from his feet and the tomahawk from his hand. Ato-sis' tail lashed out and caught the hilt of Parker's sword. He threw the blade with such force that it pierced a tree to the hasp. The demon came for Parker first. The Pilgrim warrior backed away from the beast. His steps were measured, and he kept the fire to his right.
"There is nowhere to run, Parker."
The Englishman took several more steps until his back was to the woods. He prayed the demon would follow. Ato-sis stopped short of the tree line and laughed.
"You have no surprises for me, Christian."
"Come and see, demon." Ato-sis chuckled.
"Ahiga, come forth."
Parker felt a mighty arm wrap around him. Its strength lifted him from the ground and constricted his chest, forcing him to fight for air. Ahiga dragged Parker into the center of the clearing and dropped him to the ground. Umpagos stood and rushed the Abenaki. Ato-sis' tail lashed out again. The blunt impact knocked Umpagos across the clearing. He struck the ground and slid into the woods. "Ahiga, how? You are a man of honor." Parker rose and was struck back down by the brave.
"I told you, Christian, men seek me."
Ato-sis stepped to the row of spits.
"Now choose."
"Ahiga, your father is a man of his word. How could you betray him?" The mighty warrior was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his words were brandished with shame. "I must find forgiveness." Ato-sis spoke in English again, so that only Parker could understand.
"You see, Christian, even these heathens understand the burden of sin. They may not know the word for it, but it weighs on them as any of God's creations. Ahiga sought me out. He knows the true gift I offer."
You offer lies. Ato-sis's thin lips grew large. Sharpened teeth betrayed his delight. Go ahead. Try telling him that. Parker looked to the massive Indian that had him pinned to the ground. His voice was calm. Ahiga, what possible sin could lead you to this weaver of lies? Ahiga dropped his head and whispered one word. Tis quantum. Tis quantum? My friend and brother, tis quantum. He was taken by the Englishman Thomas Hunt, and it is my fault. No man can bear the sin of another, Ahiga. It is not your fault that such a monster came upon your village. The native's foot pressed harder on Parker. It became difficult to breathe. It is my fault. It was I that led the man to our village. It is my burden that so many were taken, that my brother was taken. His mother still cries. Parker found his breath. Turning to this evil thing, this monster, is not the answer. Enough. Ahiga, bring him here, and I will finish what I began. I will burn the shame from your spirit, as I promised. Ahiga grabbed Parker by the collar and lifted him from the ground with little effort. It was clear now that the Abenaki had allowed him to win the earlier fight. The encounter was all of the demon's design. Parker looked into the eyes of the brave. Do you not see the trickery? Do you not see the lies he has weaved that you have brought me here? The lies do not end upon the fire, Ahiga. The pain will only grow. Beyond the fire, there is only the pain of more flames. There is salvation, but it is not found here. You know nothing of my pain, English. Don't I? I quest for my own forgiveness. You feel the shame that others should feel. I am responsible for my own sins. I bear a burden that you cannot imagine. That is why I've come to your lands. That is why I seek this beast and others. I will not take his offer. My God is stronger than this beast, and it is only he that can forgive me. Don't let your guilt lead you to another mistake, my friend. Salvation can be had, but not on this path. Parker placed his hand on the Indian's shoulder. He had felt Ahiga's grip loosen as he spoke, and now the mighty Ahiga looked into the Englishman's eyes. He found hope in the Indian's gaze. Ahiga growled and dragged Parker to the feet of the demon. He forced the Englishman to his knees and pinned his arms behind his back. You see, Jonathan Parker. Ato-sis's English was perfect despite a full set of lips. Men want what I offer. I shall burn the sin from your soul. Then Umpagos shall suffer at my spit. But this brute, I'm not done with him. Yes, you are, demon. He is no longer yours to command. Parker drew two kukri from his back and rose. He screamed as he crossed the blades across the wrist of the demon and drew them back. Ato-sis's taloned hand was severed from his arm. The monster reeled back in shock. Blood covered the ground as it thrashed through the pain. It cradled the nub in his hand. He snarled and winced and held forth the stump. Parker watched as the severed limb grew back into place. I told you, mortal weapons cannot harm me. The Pilgrim warrior smiled and dropped to the ground. Ahiga screamed with the anguish that filled his spirit and lunged at the demon, driving the spit that had pierced his own body into the giant creature. The totems that ran the length of the weapon began to glow, turning from charred black to vibrant gold. Ato-sis screamed in pain and grasped at the stake. Ahiga thrust the second half of the spit in the creature at the shoulder. Again, the totems lit. The demon writhed, a hand on each spit. Despite his strength, they could not be removed. Scales did not replace the damaged skin. Blood poured from the wounds. Ato-sis thrashed about the clearing, emitting terrible sounds as it cursed the men in 1,000 different languages. The creature's strength waned. The wounds were too severe. Ato-sis fell to his knees by the fire that he had stoked to rob men of their souls. Parker walked up to the weakened demon and placed a boot on its ribs. Ato-sis wheezed a final vow of revenge. "Your soul will be ours, Parker." "Only God knows the fate of my soul, demon, and in his name I cast you out." With a mighty shove, Parker toppled the demon Ato-sis onto the fire. The bed of coals erupted, and flames rose to consume the eater of men in a ferocity that forced the two men to shield their eyes. Ato-sis screamed. The shrieks were those of 1,000 pained men. The wails continued while the creature burned. It was not over quickly. Parker found Umpagos fighting for consciousness in the brush at the edge of the forest. He helped his companion to his feet and led him back into the clearing. Umpagos looked upon the burning creature and grunted. "That is quite the fire. He is quite large. It should burn for a while." "About that, you told me Gluskab made Ato-sis smaller." "Smaller does not mean small. He was even bigger before, so even though he is big now, he is still smaller." "Umpagos, if you're going to be wrong all of the time, you should just tell me now." Umpagos shrugged and moved off to look for his remaining tomahawk. Parker found where his sword had been embedded in the tree. The demon's strength had driven it to the hilt. He grabbed the weapon and pulled. It didn't move. He tugged harder to no effect. Ahiga placed a hand on Parker's shoulder and pulled him aside. He reached up and with one yank removed the blade from the tree's grasp as if he was pulling it from a well-oiled scabbard. The mighty Abenaki walked silently back to the row of totem-inscribed spits. He pulled one from the ground. "Where do you go from here, Ahiga?" The warrior drove his knee up and threw the spit. The snap echoed like a gunshot in the clearing. Ahiga felt the weight of each half in his hands. The balance was perfect. He strode back to the man in black. "We seek this salvation together, Pilgrim." The mighty warrior stepped into the forest and was swallowed by the darkness. Jonathan Parker and Umpagos followed. The end. Thank you for joining us again this week. I hope you enjoyed Pilgrim by Benjamin Wallace. If you want to check out Ben and more of his work and get a free audiobook from his website, benjaminwallacebooks.com, or you can check him out on Facebook at Benjamin Wallace Author or on Twitter at BooksBenjamin. There are also some links in the liner notes, or you can just Google his name. I mean, you Google him, he'll be all over the place. All right, if you enjoy stories and would like to hear a new one each week, please subscribe and check us out on Facebook at Pocket Pulp, where we look forward to talking with and about the writers further. If you're a writer and would like to have your story featured on Pocket Pulp, shoot me an email at pocketpulpsubmission@gmail.com. My name is Eric Brian Moore, Eric with a C, Brian with a Y, and you can follow me on Twitter or check out my website, ericbrianmoore.com. Music by Bluemont Score and Eternal Producer from Pixabay. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. And I look forward to reading you another fantastic story next week.